and sister-in-law of Allan's. But also, Allan was much more than a brother-in-law. He was my dear, dear friend. And once Irene died, he and I found ourselves spending lots of dinners together and taking rides to Labun for his favorite maple walnut ice cream and having long conversations, deep theological ones. And one of the reasons I am now the chaplain at Dogwood Manor, actually the reason, is because of my brother-in-law. One day we went for supper and he said, "Cheryl, did you know the chaplain at Dogwood is leaving?" And I said no, and that was that. And a week later we went out for dinner again and he said, "Did you ever think about applying for a job like that?" And I said no. And he said, "Okay, maybe you should." And that was that. And then I began to think about it and pray about it and consult with friends of mine, and here I am, the chaplain. So Allan started that journey, I think, prompted by the Holy Spirit, because it's a great place for me. So I'm sure there's many other memories out there of him and ways that you would like to pay tribute to him. And I'm going to ask that Nina come first. She has some greetings from students of his from a while ago. And when you come up, you may need to hold the mic because the stand tends to want it to go much lower than we'd like it to.
Hi everyone, so my name is Nina and I am Allan's daughter-in-law. And I came across a letter. Lots has been said about his time teaching in Malaysia. And I have a letter from 1967 that is titled "A Farewell to Mr. Labun." And I just thought it was really incredible to have it here in typed paper, and I wanted to read it to you. So just bear with me, it's not too long, it's a couple minutes. So this is from a student by the name of Ting Si Ping, and my apologies if I'm pronouncing it wrong. A farewell to Mr. Labun. On the 5th of August, 1967, our kind and intelligent teacher, Mr. Labun, will be leaving us for Canada. All of us, of course, will be very sad, but he has to say goodbye to us. Mr. Labun is a Canadian 31-year-old. He is a Christian, and he came to Sarawak on the 4th of September, 1964. When he first came to our school, he taught us English and history. He is very kind to the students and always quite reasonable and funny, and created reasonable and funny examples so that we can understand better. In April 1965, he flew to Canada for his wedding and came back to our school with his wife. Mrs. Labun, Irene, is a kind young woman, 26 years old. She was a nurse in Canada. She taught health sciences in Methodist Secondary School in Minnetown and first aid in the Teachers College. She also gave some presentations in the assembly in our school. Mr. and Mrs. Labun always helped in the Methodist Church with the choir and Sunday school. We were also very happy to hear that Mr. and Mrs. Labun had a young and beautiful daughter born to them on the 23rd of September, and her name is Teresa. During the time when Mr. Labun was teaching in our school, he organized a softball team, the scripture reading club, he also led the activities in the library. He taught us the proper way of playing softball and had practices every evening after school. Every Thursday after school, we held a meeting of the scripture reading club. He always told us stories that were in the Bible and also taught us many songs. His favorite hobby is reading, listening to music, and photography. He has taken many photos of places in Minnetown and other interesting things. He said that he liked it very much there because the people are kind and help him a lot. The only problem is, that he said, was that he could not speak the local languages. And if he could do this, he would learn and understand the people so much more. He does not like the weather because it's too hot. When I questioned him about the comparison of our school students with those in Canada, he told me that most of our students are more interested in studying and worked harder, and also respected the teachers more. The average of the students' results is also as good as students in Canada. On the way here, he told me that he will visit the ancient, on the way home, he told me that he will visit the ancient cities of Adam and Rome, and then take a train to Switzerland. And then after visiting Switzerland, he would travel down the Rhine River to Holland, and then return to his native land of Canada. He will also see the Expo 67 in Montreal. When he returns home, he will teach English and geography at East System High School in Canada. As we Mr. Labun and his family may not be able to come back to our country, but I hope that they can come back and, if possible, visit us. Last of all, we want to say thanks to Mr. Labun for all of the things he has done for us in our school. We also hope that Mr. Labun and his family will return home happily and live happily in his native land, Canada. God will be with him and his family always. Ting Su Ping, from 1967. And at the bottom of the letter is this lovely little picture, lovely on the table plan, of a hand-drawn plane with a little sign that says one way, two way, and the two way is slashed out, and it's flying back to Canada.
It has been mentioned many times, but just to tack onto that, to kind of go full circle here, Teresa was the one who has been in contact with them to let them know about Dad, but we really cannot say enough how special this was for Dad, that they tracked him down after 50 years, and he just could not stop talking about this, and so hopefully that you're actually getting a chance to see some of this. His very, very special students in your many places around the world. I know in California and Australia and all the many places, so hopefully you are able to see this as well. And there were many, many wishes that I could give to you, but I will just read two of them. One of them said, my classmates and I have a warm affection for your late father and really cherish the memory of his time with us in Sarawak. We hold him in high esteem on account of him being a good, friendly, and conscientious teacher. And another, Mr. Labun played a significant role in my education and helped shape my life. I also became a teacher and later a school principal. I am now 72 years old and a retiree. I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Labun and my condolences to you and your family on your great loss. May his soul rest in everlasting peace.
Please feel free to come forward if you'd like to share something, and it looks like someone does. Thank you. I'm sorry this mic is a little bit, it keeps moving, so if you can hold and hear that.
These greetings are from my wife, Rick. It's as follows. Dear Labun family, cousins, and friends. Allan Labun was my double cousin. His mother was Anna, was my father Abe's sister. His father, John, was my mother Anne's brother. Allan was also a good friend to me. Whenever I would phone him, he always took the time to talk to me. Many times he would phone to gather details of family stories, as I recall, these stories were told to me by my mother. Some of these stories were included in his exhaustive research book, Family Story of Gerhard, Dick, and Peter Elizabeth Labun. He also wrote the family story of John and Susan Sue, as well as Margaret Sue, nurse, missionary nurse, and a few others. Prior to my wedding, Allan and Irene provided valuable marriage counseling, and he officiated at the wedding this week at our 25th anniversary. Personal note, Allan was my grade 10 math teacher at Sister High School. In conclusion, I would like to leave the family with a few words of comfort at this time. Words are few, but love speaks from the heart. No words can adequately express the heart's deepest emotions. But please know this comes with long, loving prayers and deepest sympathy for the lost. Grace be to you from God and Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. Ephesians 1 verse 2.
it's not getting better. You have to hold two places.
Maybe it's right around there. Pastor Al will always, I always call him Pastor Al. Even after he was no longer our official pastor, he was still Pastor Al. When I first met him, I was 16, and John, when I look at you, if you would have those hockey stick, you had the glasses and the hockey stick sideburns, and maybe darker hair, that was my first experience of a paid pastor, because I grew up in a Brethren church and we had no pastors. So I started going to youth with Allan because we had started dating, and that was my first experience with Pastor Al. When we were 20, Pastor Al gave us and Irene gave us our premarital counseling. And that remained something that stuck out really deeply in our hearts. I remember one time he said to us, so what do you think? Marriage is 50-50 and 100, 0? And it was just a pivotal moment, that question alone, and we saw how that played out in your parents' marriage. When we were 23, we were just with a brand new baby, and we were youth sponsors. And it was at that time that your dad spoke into our life. And Teresa will know what I'm talking about. Allan was youth sponsoring an event, and where there was a bad accident which involved Teresa. And I will never forget that. That Pastor Allan and Irene came to us, and wearing the pastor hat, like wearing the parents hat, told us, there's no blame on you guys. And for young youth sponsors, that was a really incredible thing for us. Around the age of 30, he became my proctor. I came here, I was getting my early childhood at 3, and I needed to do an exam that was correspondence, and he said he'd be my proctor. At that time, I talked to him, Pastor Al, I'm not sure I like all these books I have to read. It was literature for young children. I was new to Lion, Witch in the Wardrobe, and The Dark is Rising, and I said, this kind of isn't the thing I normally read. And we sat there in his office, and he just explained, he said, Joy, that's life. It's life, good and evil, light and dark. And that was also a very good moment for me. Allan and I worked with him as deacons, and we learned some of the most incredible things during that time about a pastor who loved his congregation, but he also loved those who were helping to care. So that was really a great thing. We remember blessing him and Irene when they were leaving, and the happy sad that comes with losing a pastor to, not losing a pastor to death, but losing them as your pastor there. But it was years later when they returned, and Pastor Al blessed me as I was pastoring here for 7.5 years. And I remember those times, so it's pretty incredible that he was on the forefront of women in leadership, and he also passed that on to me as I pastored. And a few years ago, just prior to COVID, I came home and there was a voicemail that said, hey Joy, it's Pastor Al, and I have something I'd like to do. I make a really great chicken curry, and I would love to make some and either drop it off or you can pick it up. I can freeze it, I have containers, you can use it for yourselves or for ministry. In the end, Allan went and picked up, and I think your grandkids were coming over that night. So it was a short visit, but that was some of the best chicken curry I've ever tasted. Everything that you saw and everything that we heard was so true. It's not a given that every pastor that you see on the podium is one you see in Sobeys or somewhere else, but he was. He was the real deal, and we are so thankful for that. If Allan was here, I'll leave with this one story. We were just newlyweds as well, and he was washing his car, and right behind Dairy Queen, there used to be a car wash, and he sees Pastor Al pull up, and he said, Pastor Al came up to the garbage can, and he opens up his trunk, and he kind of is looking a couple ways, and he pulls out a case of beer. And he throws it in the garbage can, and then he's like, oh, hi, Allan. And Allan's like, hi, Pastor Al. And he says, you know what, I was at the church, and they had a party in the parking lot, which we all knew happened, and it's probably still was. And I decided that I'd pick up this glass and throw it away. So that's what he was doing. Anyways, that's what he said. I think that's what he was. Anyways, you guys will miss him, just like all of his friends who are here supporting him. Thanks.
I've said it here a bit, but I have a few more things that I need to share. Allan was provided to me as a mentor when I came here 12 years ago to the church from Calgary. Kyber has a history of doing this thing called a ministry support member. And so this was foreign to me, but I go for breakfast with this older gentleman who I'm told was the founding pastor of the church. It took me a few of these breakfasts to determine he's not actually a spy. He's not digging. Someone I can trust and who cares deeply for me. And yeah, we have shared many breakfasts, many coffees together, and have had a deeper friendship over the years. I am just so deeply impacted by his character. Over breakfast, over coffees. So I affirm, I agree with all that's been said here about Allan, the pastor. It was also helpful to see Allan as more than just a pastor. To see, what I got to see often, glimpses, was a young boy who still craved adventure and being wild. And that never really left him. I recall it was probably about 5 years ago. He's a bachelor at this point, and we go for coffee. He pulls out his phone, he starts showing me pictures, some of the pictures we saw on the slideshow of big fish, and tells me he went on this fly-in remote fishing trip with some of his buddies. And my jaw just hits the floor in equal parts looking at these incredible fish, so I'm jealous. But I'm also concerned, like, are you able to do a trip like that? That sounds really intense. But he just never lost his appetite for adventure. The other story took place right here in the gym. We had some kind of event where we had many balloons here in the gym, and these were filled with helium, and I guess the helium was really strong and good because the balloons went up to the ceiling and they stayed there for weeks. And I was just mentioning it to him, you know, we gotta figure out a way to get those balloons down. We have a scissor lift that's way in the back of the gym. It's gonna be a pain to get these things. He says, I have an idea, and just leaves it at that. So then a couple days later, he's back at the church, and he's carrying some long pipe with him, and he explains that this is a relic from his days in Malaysia. He tilts this thing back, boom! Pop! The balloon, the one shot, he has a blow gun, and he just, like, one shot took that thing right off the ceiling. Again, my jaw hit the floor, and I was just amazed at this man, and having never lost his boy appreciation for adventure. He was an awesome guy. We'll miss him.
I'm a little bit jealous of you as well because of all the time you spend with him as a pastor, but I spent maybe some amount of time with him, 30 years, 30 plus years as a son-in-law. So I'll say it's hard to put into words the extent of the influence that Allan has had on my life. When I was 23, I returned to Christianity and to the church, and I joined the church that my parents were attending, which was this one, Kyber. I had no idea of the history of the church or its pastor. We've all heard what that was. I didn't know. Anyways, a few months later, I was baptized by Allan before heading off and going to Bible school. When I returned, it was at this church where I met great Christian friends and joined a fellowship group. And those were great friends, and it was an awesome fellowship group. How much influence did Al have on those parts of my life? I'm not really sure, but But it was some for sure. As many of you know, his doctoral thesis was about the importance of creating an atmosphere of friendship in the church so that people will feel welcome and develop lasting relationships in a Christian community. And so I do feel like it's not something that I was aware of then, and certainly not so much as in all the years of him as a father-in-law, but to think that perhaps this is why I stayed at this church, this is why I met Teresa, this is how my kind of newfound Christian faith was formed, was because of his influence in this church. So speaking of lasting relationships, when I was 27, he also officially spoke at my wedding, partly because I did marry his daughter, Teresa. And so not only in the church family, but now I was welcomed into his personal family. And over the many years since those early days, I also witnessed Al's steady hand, as was already mentioned many times, in family and in Christian leadership and ministry. So one of those times was here at McIver. And I know that you all know that he was well respected. And I've rarely seen this amount of respect given to a pastor anywhere since. So we were at a members meeting, and the Mennonite church, as it normally goes or should go, the pastor's not in charge, the members are. And on this occasion, some of the members were struggling to get to what we would want as a unified position on some topic that I don't remember. Various members were being recognized and spoke about their divergent views. The positions became more and more entrenched. And I began to wonder, just sitting there as a random member, not having much much to care about on that topic, but whatever it was, I began to wonder, how could this be resolved? And then Al indicated that he would like to speak. And up until now, he had said nothing at the meeting, but he raised his hand, the moderator recognized him, he stood up, he spoke both firmly and graciously to the point that was being debated, not criticizing any. Sorry, I don't know why I choked up about this. I thought for sure I would have while reading it, but here I am. Not criticizing anyone's view, and then he sat down. Basically, that debate was over, the vote was taken. I don't remember the issue or the result of the vote, but I knew that I had witnessed basically a work of humility, respect, and honestly some type of holy power from a very quiet man. And so when I also joined his family, it was always interesting for me to sit with Al and talk about whatever was on our minds. His mind was almost always on the things of God, the Bible, fellowship, and the church. He loved Jesus and aspired to do the work that God had put in front of him. I'll just make a small side note. I've been in his apartment lately, and the last book he was reading was about the signature of Christ, and the bookmark in it was a plastic bookmark. You could get anywhere, but it said, "Jesus loves me." So, anyways, one day, a few years back, he had been at our place in Ontario to visit, and he handed me a small book and said, "You should read this." It was a devotional book by Tim and Kathy Keller called The Songs of Jesus, which you might have seen on a display table. Well, at that point in my life, I was not sure that I needed to read another Christian book, and I wasn't much into devotions, which is probably what he understood clearly enough. And so he gave me this advice. But when the time did come for me to start taking my walk of faith more seriously, I remembered the book he gave me, and I thought, if Al says you should read this book, then I certainly should. I've read that book twice, reading it every day for 2 years. He was right, and it has changed my life. So in conclusion, I'm forever grateful to God for bringing me into Al's life.
My name is Labun, and Al is my brother-in-law. I don't have a church story today, but I do have a fishing story to tell you. And some of those pictures that referred to were probably one where we flew into northern Manitoba and Ontario. And it was a delight to have him. I didn't realize that he actually enjoyed things like that, but he did enjoy it. I don't know if for some reason I had this feeling I should ask them, and then of course Irene was still alive. She said, of course you'll go. There's no question, just ask her. And so that's what we did. And making a story short, we were four of us, and one fellow was was a good friend of mine, who was the fellow at T. Chelmsford, the CEO of T. Chelmsford. And one of the students, graduated students, came with us. And it was very interesting. This graduated student said to me, you know, that brother-in-law of yours, we took turns. One day I go with Steve, the next day I go with Phil. And Phil said to me, you know, I'd like to go with Al a little more often than what we figured, because I have so many questions about the Bible, and this man is an incredible, he knows the Bible. You know, what has he done to know everything? He's answering all my questions. And I said to Steve, well, I don't know, he's just a good brother-in-law, that's all I know. And so the other day I texted Steve and I said, you know, Al passed away. And he texts back and he says, I know one thing. Al will be sitting in the front row in heaven.
People who use these devices have to find their way. I'm Allan's sister. My name is Kathy. Allan was a big man. Not big. Big! Did you see him in his coffin? His head was right up to the top, and I'm sure his feet were right down below. He was a big man. Many of the things that I would love to share with you have already been shared. But one thing I want you to know, as a McIver church, he was your pastor and loyal to the core. Anything that was happening in church here, never mentioned once. And I admire him for it. Truly, he was loyal. He was a teacher's secret. He was a humble man. If you ever dared to mention anything that he had done, he said, where did you hear that? I never mentioned it again. He was an honest man. Love honesty. Don't you? Love truth. Honesty. And of course, we already know he was a historian. He loved to tell stories. True stories. And of course, now we have the chance to read those true stories. He was a peacemaker. He was so calm. He was so collected. He don't make noise. But he's a good listener. He was thoughtful of others. He would be the one that would be touring this room and comforting those who are family in bereaved or sorrowing for loss. And he his weaknesses. He was such a good big brother. We will miss him terribly. I didn't want this day to ever come, but that would have been totally selfish. Do you know, he's a very good actor. The family went on trips, and they went back and forth, just to different places. Everything was packed in that trunk. It had a place, it was in its place, and if you needed it, it could be found without too much hassle. I probably should have made a little bit more of a list, but I didn't. So I will end now. Thanks be to God for giving us this brother to love us, to cherish us, to show us the way. And thank you that now he is at home with you. Thank you, Lord Jesus. Amen.
My dad, as you have heard, loved to talk about his family and most recently his cousins about family history. And I, in the last couple of months, have just had the privilege to be in communication with so many of my dad's cousins and help him with getting a book launch done of his family history book. And so I have this to read. One of the cousins I've been in touch with is Walter Labun, and he has asked if he could read something at this sharing time. He is not here in this province, would love to be here for this time, and so just a really, well, here we go. It's The Life of Allan Labun in My Eyes and Memory from Walter Labun. It is fitting to begin my memories of Allan when I was a young child. I was fortunate to spend some of my early child years in summer on the John and Anna Labun farm. It was there I got to see Allan up close as the rest of the family. Being 13 years younger than Allan, there was a big age gap, especially when we are young. But nonetheless, Allan would always show genuine friendship, interest in me, respect for all, and a sense of leadership. He was always the older cousin whom I admired for these qualities. It was after many years when we had all grown up and were doing our own things that my siblings started mentioning Allan more often. They talked about how Allan was doing research on our heritage. Allan would meet with all the aunts and uncles to discuss the past and gather as much information as they could remember, including what life was like growing up, for them growing up. Then when I spoke to the aunts, they would speak in such glowing admiration of Allan. They absolutely loved him. Whether Allan wanted to assume this role or it just happened, he was the patriarch of the Labun cousins. All of us recognized this. As I got older, I grew more interested in our family name. There seemed to be so little information. Ron Suderman had done some earlier work which he shared with anyone who showed some interest. I started to do some of my own genealogy research and often came to a dead end. That's when I would say it's time to see Allan. Whenever I came to Winnipeg, I made it a priority to visit Allan. He and Irene were so receptive every time I came over, they really made me feel at home. I would take along the information, including pictures that I had found, and we would discuss it. Each of our visits would go on for hours. I think sometimes Irene would ask herself, what can these guys be discussing for so many hours? She was always patient. I remember after each visit I was on a high after I had left, knowing that I had been able to glean some additional knowledge. As I mentioned to Donna at the time Allan launched his book on the family story of the Dixon Labuns, I was looking forward to seeing him this summer as I had more questions to ask him. We are grateful to Allan in completing his book and sharing it with all his family. Thank you, Allan, for this. Irene and Allan were also compassionate, understanding, and loving people. They visited my brother Edward during his last months when he was battling pancreatic cancer. I don't know what their discussions were, but I know it helped my brother. He told me how much he appreciated his talks with Allan. We greatly appreciate the kindness, caring, and love he showed to our brother. Allan was known for many things, such as a husband, father, grandfather, pastor, friend, historian, genealogist, and a wonderful cousin to us all. We will all miss Allan, as he has left a great legacy, which we will never forget. This legacy will be carried on to the next generations to come. Thank you to the Allan Labun family for allowing me to say these words. Much appreciated. And thank you to Walter for giving these words to be said.
I was just going to say, is there anyone else? Please come forward, Peter.
Hello, I'm Peter, the baby of the family, although I don't look much like a baby these days. This has been just a most informative funeral. I have learned so much more about my brother Allan that I didn't know before. And part of that possibly is the fact that we are about 12 years separated. And I really never got to know him quite as well as I would have liked to because of that 12-year difference. And by the time I was old enough to start to care about my siblings, he was already off to higher education. And so I never really got to know him quite as well as I would have liked to. I do remember a trip that he and I did. This is the longest time that we ever had together as brothers, and that was on a trip to BC where we were both delegates for church, various churches to the Mennonite Conference. And at that time we had many deep discussions, and I remember one book that we were discussing was Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. It was always we had many philosophical discussions, and I just really treasured that time when I got to know some more about him. He really was a patriarch in our family. And as we have found out today, he was a patriarch in just about every sphere of influence that he was in. And I can tell that all of us really appreciate that form of leadership that he had in the family. I too have a blowgun experience. The last time that he and I were together was when he was getting ready to move out of the condo that he was in, which happened to be my mother-in-law's condo that he was living in before he moved to Ghana. He was trying to sort things out at home, and he hauled out this blowgun. And he says, "Peter, have you ever shot with this thing?" I said, "No." And so he says, "Let me demonstrate." So here's this blowgun that's about, I think it must be somewhere around 6 to 8 feet long. It's huge. And it's got this little hole there. I can't imagine how anybody would have manufactured that thing. There's no drill bit that's long enough to go there, and let alone that as being straight. Because he said, "You just aim for that little circle on that box you got out of a cardboard box." And he says, put it as far away from us as we could. We were standing in the kitchen, and this blowgun, and his target was in the sunroom, about 20 feet away or more. And he says, "See if you can hit that little circle over there." It was absolutely amazing that how easy it was on my very first shot. I hit the circle. Anyway, his life provided a lot of things for the rest of us to emulate. And we've heard so much of that today. And really thank his family for putting together this absolutely beautiful film. Thank you so much.
take my turn. I'm Norm, and I'm sure most of you can tell that I look the most like Allan of all the rest of the siblings. On the blowgun thing, we practiced with blowguns in school. We rolled up pieces of paper and had our pockets full of beans or field peas, handy to use for little small-time wars. And some of us got to be pretty good at it. Al, of course, beat us all with getting an actual blowgun that could be used for hunting. My story is short, but it goes back to when Al was around 11 years old. Al was 7 years older than I. Bob was 5 years older than I, are the brothers between me and Al. And we had on the farm what we call the elevator. Now that was something that was used to load grain from your bin into your truck, and precursor to today's augers. Now the elevator was about so wide, and you could climb up the top of it. And Al was climbing up to this thing, and Bob was behind him a few feet, just because Al was up there. And I, being roughly 4 years of age or so, was on the ground watching this going on. And it seems to me that our mom caught onto this, and she called him to task about climbing up this dangerous thing. I says, "What were you doing up there?" "Well, I had something I wanted to talk to God about. And I get as close as I could."
Yes.
I really don't want to be the last person to say something because I'm more distantly related. But I love a good story, and I've loved all the stories here today. And also something came to me. I'm Labun, so I am Teresa and Donna and Jonathan's second cousin. So I guess I'll represent my family. My Aunt Nettie's over there. Her husband was Albert, and he's passed away. So that was a cousin of Allan. And then there's Naomi over there, who's my sister, and our dad was Art Labun, another cousin. And I don't know how many more gatherings we'll have like this as a Labun family. Karen's over here, another cousin, second cousin. And so all of us then had this memory of Kronsgaard Church. And Kronsgaard Church, when we were super, super little, it was a little country church in southern Manitoba, and it was filled with Labuns. I think, is that right, Peter and Norman? Do you remember Kronsgaard Church?
You're talking about the one on Grandpa's land or the other one?
I don't know, we're there too. Maybe this is a good time to clarify this story, because you hear these stories, you have these experiences, but they're sort of vague. Anyways, I just remember there was a church called Kronsgaard Church, and there were all us cousins running around, and aunts and uncles there, and it was just such a neat memory. And I think it was a Dick who started the church. Is that right? You don't know. Did I dream this? Anyways, I guess it's kind of saying goodbye a lot to the older generation, and that just makes me sad. And Allan was my pastor too. Anyways, it feels like a huge responsibility to be that last the next generation. I'm sorry for your loss, and we loved him a lot. No, I don't want to be the last person. I don't understand.
Ellie and I always go together. Ellie and I grew up with Teresa. We grew up in the Labun house pretty much every weekend. So let me just tell you, there are different kinds of Mennonites out there. And it's not MBs and GCs, because I came from a mix of those two, and that was okay. My family was new immigrants. My family spoke German. My family ate Mennonite food. The mother did the cooking. The father came home and ruled the roost. I love my family. Don't worry about that. This isn't a complaint. Spending time in the Irene and Allan home, the woman did the talking. The kids were cheerleaded to the nth degree. Teresa and all, she's my dearest friend, and all of her crazy ideas were encouraged and were applauded and were experienced together. John and all his little brother irritating things that he would do were enjoyed. Donna got a white piano. Who had a white piano? This was the only family that had a white piano. Everything was different in this home. The bird was loose and flying around the house, and it would pick at the cuckoo clock and it would open it up, and nobody had a problem with this. This was a different family. The food was different. It had curry in it. I had never in my life tasted anything like that. I just knew farmer sausage, chia and smoked fat, which is good, but curry and rice, and the dad cooked it. But the story I want to tell you isn't at all about the dad of one of my dearest friends, and he was never my pastor. My sister told me a story. She was a charter member of this church, or at least the first month of the church starting. And my sister Ermi told me this story. It was on a Sunday, back when people still dressed up for church. And somebody came in through the doors of MacIver Church, and they weren't dressed very nicely. And they were somehow welcomed, and they spent time in the church, and Ermi went to them and talked to them afterwards and met them. And they told her something that she had to kind of put things together. And they said, yes, the caretaker told me that I could come in, and my boots were muddy, so the caretaker told me that I could take them off and told me where to put them. And here they are, and they're all clean. And Ermi had thought, well, the caretaker? Who's the caretaker? And the person pointed out, and it was Allan. And my sister said, that's my pastor. That's what he did. He cleaned the boots of somebody who was new and different. And I think that's the story I wanted to leave with you guys.
I have one more very short thing to say. I did in my speech earlier talk about his camera, which brought to me a very dear memory of one of our travels together, and I couldn't quite work it in. I know there's a lot of place for the serious and the joking, and I think he could have done it if he were here to write my speech for me, but I couldn't quite get it done, so I wanted to tell you this story anyways. We were in England, and he was there visiting us, and we were walking around the downtown, and there was the police officers with their big regalia and all of their uniforms. And he walks up with his fancy camera. I believe he was on a horse, confirm? Yeah, policemen on horses, and he walks up and he goes to the officer and he says, if I shoot at you, will you shoot at me? And he was so proud of himself. And I think about this all the time. So I just wanted to leave you all with that. We talked a lot about his wit today, and I figured we were due for a story.
Some of us are not so tall. Having been mentioned, I thought I should come and say that Allan was one of the people who welcomed me into Canada. On the night that I arrived, with my 7-week-old baby and my new husband, relatively, his cousin, Albert and Allan were very close. They were at university together and so on, and they went to camp together as counselors. But that night, we arrived at what was 2 o'clock in the morning for me, and what was 8 o'clock in the evening for everybody else. And they had a party. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I sent my baby in the back room, and then I said to Albert, how come you have a cousin who speaks with an English accent? Now, I don't really know what your father talks with an English accent. But then, after that, he went back to Malaysia. We lived in Allan, and then we had a house in what's Wolseley House, still live there. And they shared the time with us. And Teresa was there, and Donna was 6 months old, and Teresa was 2. It was lots of fun, because I had a 2-year-old at that point. But the thing I wanted to say was, when my husband was always late home from school, because he was always coaching something or doing something, and Allan would come home early from school. They're both teachers, and we would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and Allan would tell me the family history. He would draw out family trees, go through the history, and that's how I came to be a Labun.
Thank you all. I'm going to add a few quick stories. One, we camped with Allan and Irene at West Top Lake when I was younger, and it was September long weekend and it was very cold. And my father and Allan decided we should go swimming, and I decided I would go with them. So Irene and my mom kept the fire going, and Allan and my dad and I went in the water. I think I screamed the loudest, and then we timed who could stay in the longest. Allan lasted the longest of the 3 of us. My other story is that a resident at Donwood was dying, and so the family came in, and one of the family members said to me, and this follows the boot story that Tammy told. Our church, when it was built, not all the landscaping was done, and there was choir practice one night, and everyone's shoes were muddy. So they took them all off, went to choir practice. When they came back, all the shoes were clean. And the only person who had been in the church, besides all the choir people, was Allan. And she just relayed to me that that was why she became a member of the church and wanted to be here, because the pastor was willing to wash and clean all the shoes of the people in choir. And she said, that's the kind of pastor I want. Someone who will literally clean your shoes. And my other story is that in 1999, shortly after Allan had his cancer surgery, I was taken to Court of Queen's Bench in Toronto in a tax case, and I was the guinea pig for all the people in Canada who weren't ordained. I was just commissioned and licensed. It's a long story. But on behalf of the conference, Allan had to testify in court on my behalf. And I remember meeting him outside, because we had to be very careful how much communication we had. And he just said to me, he said, God will take care of all of this, Cheryl. And I said to him, I know that, but it's really hard to believe that right now. And he went in calm and assuredly and did his part. I could be in court. And then when we won the court case, I said to him, your faith was bigger than mine, and I'm glad I could lean on you, because I was very doubtful at the time that it would go well. And because we won, the tax law was changed. And Roger Friesen pointed that out to me one day when he was going through tax law. He said, Cheryl, because of that court case, tax law changed in the favor of people
come from places where they're not ordained. Because at that time, my denomination wasn't ordaining us as women. Which leads me to my last story, and my last time out with Allan, we went to the Half Moon, and I brought a new book, which was called Mother God, and it focused on the feminine sides of God, and it's a beautiful story with beautiful illustrations. And as he went through the book, he mentioned all the scriptural passages that obviously the author had used to write the book. And I had the guide of the scriptural texts beside me, and as he spoke them, I went through the guide, and he was right. That's how well he knew scripture, but he also knew the female sides of God, and that we as women matter. And that is a huge gift that he gave to me. And I'm grateful. So thank you for being here and honoring a man we all loved in different ways. And thanks be to God for giving him to us as a gift. And now, if you want to come to the cemetery, because of all the floodwaters, there's a detour route, and there's a map here that you can pick up. Thank you.